This is not another econ podcast. I'm Ian Kaneshiro. It's a story you've heard 1,000 times. You start a business, you gain customers, you generate revenue, and you grow. Then you start to need help. As your business develops, you bring on employees, sales, marketing, customer service, bookkeepers, IT, developers, the list goes on and on. Now you are finding yourselves in these day-to-day battles where you're constantly firefighting. You're putting out these fires that are problems that are by these contributors. And without the input of these contributors, you need to solve their problems. And so this takes away from the efforts that you need in order to steer the ship. And so we often talk about delegation of tasks as a challenge, but delegation of decisions is a whole different animal. Not to mention in the state of the current workplace with people working in office, fully remote and hybrid, managing people has never been more challenging. At Escala, a management consulting organization in the e-commerce space, CEO Yoni Kozminski leads the charge in helping hundreds of businesses tackle some of these very hurdles.
Thanks so much for having me, and what an introduction.
Yeah, thanks for being here. You know, Yoni, you and I have worked together in the e-commerce space for many years, so it only seems proper that you're on the show and, you know, spreading your words of wisdom. Would you kind of kick us off by sharing a little bit about, you know, your company and your role within the business and your background?
Yeah, absolutely. I'm going to try and fire through this as quickly as possible because people aren't here to listen about my life story. They're trying to get the nuggets and the value, like you very well set it all up. So the short of it is my background was about a decade or so in creative advertising and digital marketing strategy, working for the likes of Sony, MasterCard, Mercedes-Benz, Medtronic, and smaller agencies with obviously large-scale clients. About 7 years ago, I had the opportunity to dip my toes into e-commerce much more heavily, being an operator and actually growing an e-commerce business from 2 to 5 million in 12 months. It was subsequently acquired by Thrasio. On the back of that experience, just realized that there was a lot that e-commerce sellers could achieve if they were just given the right tools, the right insights, the right resources. And that was much of what we were able to achieve inside of that e-commerce business. So fast forward to today, I'm the co-founder of 3 companies, Multiply Me, which is an executive search and HR function, where we find the very best talent, or the top 5% of it anyway, in the Philippines. We place it into e-commerce businesses largely. We have a joint venture with GW Partners, an investment bank, and Sellers Fi, a lending platform in the e-commerce space where we're investing in e-commerce businesses and growing them to exit. And I think the business that's going to be most relatable where I sit as a CEO at is Escala, and that is a process improvement boutique management consultancy, which is just a whole lot of big words that big corporates like to use to say that what we do as a business is we go into them, we interview, shadow, and review and understand operationally what's happening. We build clarity, and then we build a future state, and we effectively build everything out from the accountability and org charts to the right process maps to all the SOPs, training videos, documentation, and we build all those workflows to actually not only streamline the process, but build scalability into the operation. So I've said a lot of things there, Ian, so I'm going to pass it back over to you. That was as quick as I could get it. I apologize, everyone listening.
No, I think that was great. It's really interesting how, you know, under the Escala umbrella, you have all these different business operations. And with your personal background, I'm sure that there's just a lot of different areas that you can pull on in order to help those businesses with their operational efficiencies. And there's probably a lot of problems that businesses are having that you've seen before. So, and, you know, an organization like yours is probably a super helpful and effective tool to use as you're scaling. One of the things that we spoke about you and I have spoken about in the past, and we spoke a little bit about before, is, you know, the idea of business leaders firefighting, and just trying to think about that a little bit more. Can you unpack a little bit about like why firefighting happens and how leaders kind of find themselves in these positions?
Absolutely. Let me give a tangible example here, or just let me set it up so that you understand like what you would even define as firefighting or what that looks like for the average e-commerce seller, I like to give a couple of examples. One example would be, let's say that you're a private label seller with 50 SKUs, or you're a reseller and you might have thousands, even tens of thousands of SKUs live. And we all know that there is typically, a hero SKU, or if you're a reseller, you might have the top 100 or 200 SKUs, and you put a whole high degree of attention on those specific SKUs because they're the cash cow. They're the ones that are really performing well, and you're optimizing the listings and the images. Obviously, you've got an automated AI repricer handling that aspect of it, but there's lots of other things, obviously, that go into it outside of what SellerSnap can bring. And so on the back of all of this, what tends to happen is, or the question that we like to ask is, what would it mean for you to be able to pay the same level of attention to all of those products instead of just those hero 100 for a reseller, 3 for a private label seller? And that is where typical firefighting starts, is that you have all these things going on and you just get drawn back into the business without giving everything the degree of attention that you would want to do. And so, we all have these grand plans of how do we actually achieve everything and more, only to be forced to step back into the business. So, Ian, can you repeat that second part of the question? I mean, that's the example of what firefighting is, but are we looking now to say, how do you actually solve that problem?
Yeah, I think you're putting the cart a little before the horse on this one. But yeah, we want to eventually get to how we're going to solve the problem. But what I'm trying to understand is, how do leaders find themselves in this position? Like, what are the decisions? Like, what are, or even like the emotions that come into play that put leaders in this position of saying, I have to be the one to put out these fires? And how can we kind of break that cycle?
Yeah, great question. I'd say you're all doomed. No, kid. kid. Also, for context, guys, I have a team of about 100 full-time team members, and lots of things will always draw you back into the business. But if you can build an effective system where you get the right feedback loops and the right insights, and you are staying in control of the most important things, if you're the business owner, that's obviously your cash position. That's going to be something that's paramount. You can find your way through a lot of these critical problems. But I would draw on, how do I get out of these situations? So from the emotional standpoint, obviously, I think for most people, particularly for founders or people that have been at early stage companies, you have an emotional attachment to the outcome. I want it to succeed. I want my presence to be felt. I'm going to hand it off to someone and it's not going to be done to the same level. And I think when you approach situations like that, then you become your biggest challenge and your biggest bottleneck if you don't have the ability to let go. And I think letting go has different, how would I put this? There's different levels to letting go. So it's not just, I'm going to throw my hands up and just see how let Jesus guide me. I'm really going to think through and say, from my personal lens, if I can train someone or give them the processes to get to 80% of what I can deliver, and I would say, like, for a lot of founders and businesses, the first thing that I tried to let go of so I could continue to focus on other areas, and I think one of the hardest steps for most founders, and typically actually is the last step, is how do you remove yourself from that sales seat? Because when you're building the business, you're usually the person who can sell it the best and articulate it. And my philosophy has always been, if I can get someone to 80% that will convert 80% as good as I can, the amount of leverage that gets me to build strategic relationships and partnerships, to actually focus on the operation, to think through other initiatives, or in my case, build other businesses on the back of it. That was really sort of a driving objective for me. So coming back to, outside of the emotional standpoint, and what I personally would define as success is 80% of what I can achieve. It's also building that system that gives you those feedback loops. And I know, Ian, we've spoken at nauseum about the entrepreneurial operating system, EOS, but having something like an L10, the level 10 meeting once a week, where every single department is reporting on their key metrics, is talking about any issues that have come up in the business. I got off mine this morning It's 90 minutes long. I know everything that is happening across the entire operation, all the challenges that we have, where we're driving toward, and what needs to be improved. So really long-winded answer for your first question there, but that's what I got for you.
Yeah, no, that I think that that 80% rule, if it's someone can do it 80% as good as I can, is a really interesting point to get to, because, you know, early on in businesses, we often see ourselves as being like the main person that the company is dependent on. And so I think that, you know, passing the torch, so to speak, it can be really, really difficult. But it's a higher risk of failure if you don't, right? So I think that's something that's really interesting. I love that 80% rule. In terms of, like, and that 80% rule is talking a little bit about like doing a task, right? Passing off an activity. What about passing off decision making? You know, you've grown multiple businesses. I'm sure that there's a ton of stakeholders in all the different businesses, and you have people in the trenches, and you also have people that are higher up calling the shots. How do you balance the delegation, not the delegation of activity, but the delegation of decision making?
Yeah, great question. Great question. So how we effectively approach it, I think it firstly stems from your ability to actually create clarity in who is accountable for what, and what individuals inside of the business effectively live and die by. So how we approach it internally, and we actually have free on our Escala website a mirror board template of how to build an accountability chart, an organizational chart, and there's a video, and it's all free. But the point I make is we go through this process for our entire company, including myself, including my co-founder, my business partner. You know, we go through this whole process where we're defining what are we actually accountable for, and what are the areas that we focus on inside of the business, and how does that align with our business metrics and goals and KPIs. And we actually build out this entire process and sort of this step down approach to all of that. And so inside of that, so I have, you know, my 4 R's. You know, I know what my responsibilities are. I know what the definition of my role is, you know, the requirements attached to what I need to deliver, and effectively everything that I need to be doing every day to succeed in my role for the business. So coming back to it, when every single team member has that, and you understand what is inside of your scope, inside of your accountability, so too does that decision making. So we actually bake that into those accountability charts. We understand that, you know, I'm trying to think of like really simple examples. Like right now I'm sitting as a dual role. We just, you know, we need more people, but I sit as the CEO, and I'm sitting as the CMO, effectively, the head of marketing at the same time. And so right now, while I'll seek input from sales, from customer success, from whoever, recruitment on what is needed, right now when it comes to marketing sign off, I'm the ultimate sign off. But before, when I had a head of marketing, they would sign off on all these things. And again, I would be comfortable to a degree in what their scope was and what they need to sign off on. If it was large financial investments in events and things like that, then that would go through a process where it would go into our finance function. We'd look at the budget, we'd look at the allocation. And then if it was a big dollar amount, then ultimately that would come down to a business investment decision and would need buy-in from, you know, the business partners, for example.
Yeah, and I think that's you know, from a management perspective, allowing, you know, the different heads of departments to understand their roles and giving them the autonomy to make those own decisions is really important. But often you find that with people that want to kind of climb the ladder and rise to those occasions and be in those roles, they feel really comfortable in making those decisions. I'd like to kind of pivot the conversation ever so slightly to the people that are just kind of sitting in the trenches, on a day-to-day basis, the people talking to clients, and who are really the ones that are, pushing the machine along, pushing the business along, also have to make decisions and micro decisions. And how do we allow for autonomy for those people as well? Are we using some of the same skills?
Yeah, so it would always boil down to that accountability chart, and at every level, it's being defined. But when I look at my marketing team, for example, I've got about 10 inside of the team. We work through the traction methodology, and part of it is having these quarterly goals that are defined as rocks. And so our department inside of the marketing function has 3 goals or 3 rocks we want to achieve this quarter. And on the back of that, what I've gone ahead and done with my project manager and the team is we've built KPIs attached to those objectives that are aligned with the business metrics to make sure that each individual is marked against what their contribution is to us achieving that specific rock. So coming back to it, it's not necessarily defining their accountability is defined, and the goals are defined against what we need to, as a department level, achieve. But they also have their ability to make decisions. And I think it comes a lot down to sort of the project scopes in understanding, like, what are those feedback loops? And to give you an example, like, when I'm putting my marketing hat on, I'll work through and set out the strategy. So we have, 5 different landing pages, and on those landing pages are really high value ebook downloads. It might be, we just launched recently a job description builder leveraging AI to enable people to build their own job descriptions, or a repository of 200 plus job descriptions that we've pre-built, and all of these things that are high value resources for people. So I'll set out the strategy in terms of what does the experience look like, but then I'll brief in my copywriting team and graphic design team, and they'll take it to full term. Like, I'll just have the strategic input, but they'll present effectively after the wireframing of the emails all the way through to the actual finished design. They'll be making all of those micro decisions with, very little input from me until there's a closer to finalized product. So I don't know if that answered your question.
Yeah, it does.
But I hope it did.
Yeah, it does. It sounds to me like by showing a certain level of trust and consistently showing that trust will help your team, be able to make those decisions and micro decisions without feeling weird. Because I know, I'm thinking back to early days of my career and in different jobs. When you first start a job, you're like, where is the line, and how do I find it? How do I get to it? Can I cross it? When can I do it? And all those questions are constantly sitting in the back of our head, and I'm sure in the back of the head of everyone at every point in time. But it sounds like what you were able to do is say, hey, this is what we're going to do. This is kind of what I expect you to do. Go and run with it. And probably the first time there was a ton of questions and they got feedback from you, but the second time there was slightly less, the third time less, and so on until at this point, it sounds like you're at a point where, like, this is a vision and you guys know how to execute it better than I do, because this isn't what I do on my day-to-day. And you really trust them to make those decisions.
Yeah, that's a really accurate analysis. And what I would say, and I think for a lot of people, doesn't matter if you're a business owner, senior leader, whatever in the company, I think one of the challenges I personally experienced when I took over marketing 6 months ago is that at the start, I felt like everyone was looking to me for, what do we do next? What do we do next? What do we do next? And without me turning up and being the driver of ideas, which my team have much better ideas than I do, they just didn't have the infrastructure to enable them to set them free and make all these micro and even macro decisions on a daily, weekly, monthly basis. Coming back to it, we came together, we built the goals for the next 90 days. On the back of that, everyone understands where we're driving toward and the projects that are needed to achieve that success at a business level, and how our function relates to that. And so when everyone is clear on what the road looks like, all of a sudden there's less pressure put on you as a leader or as a manager in the business, because it's very clear at a much more detailed level, and people are therefore set free.
Yeah, I love that. I think one of the one of the things that I want to pull out of what you just said is that you said we set the goals, right? And so it sounds like your team also has input in how their success is being measured. And, I've really found over the years that people tend to work harder on things that they help create. So when they're setting the goals for themselves, it holds them accountable in a different way from both knowing that the goal is, probably a SMART goal, that it's measurable and obtainable, right? But also that it's something that they want to do as well because they help create it. So I really loved the language that was used there. As we kind of wrap up our chat, I want to kind of move along to a point that I'm not sure we spoke about in the beginning of this, is that you are working with nearly 100, like nearly remote teams, entirely remote teams. And so we spoke a little bit about, firefighting, delegating activities and tasks, and delegating decision-making. And with remote teams, that can be even more complicated because it's not like, you can always turn around to your teammate or your colleague to the right of you and collaborate in that really quick way. What challenges do you see with that remote environment, and how are you overcoming that in terms of decision-making and delegation of that?
Yeah. So to unpack the question, I would look at a few different areas. One, I think, as a fundamental, the difference between having an in-person versus a remote team is the things that you lose, in my experience from a remote team, is some of those like interpersonal, like relationship building opportunities. You don't get those. I passed them in the corridor, we walked and we met a coffee in the morning, and those are the things for me that I miss when it comes to my team specifically. And most of my team is Philippines based, so got to get over there and make a real trip of it. But when it comes to actually like the challenges and the structure, I actually think that if you build the right systems and processes around how you operate, you can create a much higher degree of efficiency. And just to sort of point out the throwaway comment you had, you could turn around and chat with someone. No, Lippy will tell you, my co-founder will tell you how annoying it is when we used to sit next to each other in the office at the early days of Multiply Me, and I get off a sales call and I'd be super excited about it, and I'd chew his ear off for the next 20 minutes, at least. It's being generous. And so, again, it comes down to personality types, and that's just how I'm wired. But I would say when it comes to remote teams, like having a very clear cadence around expectations. So, coming back to the goals and KPIs and performance metrics and everything that relates to that, we have, when it comes to production inside of marketing, we run on sprint methodology, on Scrum methodology. So every 2 weeks, we're running sprints. Inside of those sprints, we understand what we're delivering, and much like I'm sure what happens inside of SalesSnap from a product release standpoint. So building those right structures becomes really important. Finding ways in which you can create that cultural element. If you're entirely remote, we do things internally like handing out monthly awards. We have the game changer of the month for 3 of our core businesses and critical functions, and it's voted by your peers and voted again by senior leadership. And we go through this, and we have a culture club. We have a whole lot of elements that I would say will become more and more common to see inside of remote teams. And I think that's one of the things that you need to remember too, is that, at the end of the day, we're all people. We want to have fun and interact and enjoy what we're doing on a daily basis. It's not just about the tangible outputs, it's about the experience as well. So I've thrown a lot of things at you there, but I would say, like, to break it down really simply, having clear structure, having regular touch points, so things like stand-up meetings, even for 15 minutes every other day, 3 times a week, can be really, really meaningful. Building a degree of culture and actually acknowledging and realizing that not everyone's just in here to produce work and get on with it. And coming back to it, like at that more macro level, having those goals that are visible and checked in on weekly really help set the tone for running remote teams.
Yeah, that was super clear. It sounds to me it boils down to being really intentional about what you're trying to do. And so if you can execute everything you're doing in an intentional way, it sounds like, remote or not, you'll find yourselves being successful. So Yoni, as we conclude, I just want to, considering the type of people that are listening to this podcast, if you had, one tip for other business leaders dealing with the challenges like being dependent on one person or, the struggle to delegate, what would that tip be?
My tip to you would be to build clarity first. So understand if it's you as a single operator of your own e-commerce business, or if you have a team, get a higher degree of clarity on what's happening. So an example I like to give for people who are running one woman or one man shows, look at what you're doing every single hour of every single day and categorize it and put it in your calendar and start to understand where you are investing your time so that you can actually build a roadmap to delegate tasks out. I would say if you're a little bit larger and you have a team, obviously you called it out yourself, having a key person dependency. If you were to lose that person, what does that mean for your business? If they were to go away and not leave a proper handover doc and things like that. So I would say documenting those processes and approaching really clearly, how do you perform every action inside of the business are going to be critical things that also enable scale as well. So that would be my tip to you.
I love that. Clarity first. It's going to be my next bumper sticker. All right. Yoni Kozminski is the co-founder and CEO of Escala, a consulting firm helping e-commerce companies find, design, and implement their strategic visions. Yoni, thank you for sharing your valuable insights and experience with us today. And, I'm sure we'll see you back soon.